Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Tech.Strong.Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Tech.Strong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Reagan, creator and CEO of Deploy Hub. And, in her free time, she's busy working with the Linux Foundation, where she sits on the boards of the OpenSSF and the CDF Technical Oversight Committee. Sounds like fun. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update about what's happening here at Tech.Strong. Be sure to register for Tech.StrongCon 2023 virtual event on March 16th. Speaker submissions are still open, and we always love sponsors. Tech.Strong will also be hosting our annual DevOps Connect DevSecOps Day at RSAC in San Francisco on April 24th. And be sure to look for us on Broadcast Alley all week, where we'll be live streaming. Stop by and say hi. You can register for all of our events by going to techstrongevents.com, and be sure to tune in every day to Tech.Strong TV for great shows and interviews. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Well, Jody, first of all, it's great to be here. And I'm really excited for today's guest. Liz Rice is amazing, and she's in the security space. And it's timely because, we talked about a few months back, probably early in the show, we talked about the Biden administration's requirement for submitting software bill of materials, or SBOMs, with your software if you're doing business with the US government, which, by the way, is a very reasonable request, to be honest. Even though many companies may struggle with it, it is a reasonable request. We've always been waiting for the other shoe to drop. And in this past week, we heard it did. So now we have the European Cyber Resiliency Act. I've read through it. It's not as straightforward as an executive order that says, hey, SBOMs are needed. It's far more detailed. And I have some concerns about the open source community and how the open source community is going to comply with some of the requirements. And it does have a list of the kinds of software that they're going to be worried about. So it may not apply to all open source tools or open source packages. But anyway, it's out there, and people should be aware of what Europe is doing now to help safeguard European software and what gets installed in European environments around security. So they're starting to get heated up. This discussion around security and software security and supply chain security when it comes to software is getting pretty real. And I'm hoping that we can get some insights from Liz on this.
Awesome. All right. Well, Tracy already let the cat out of the bag. Our guest today is Liz Rice. Liz, I'm going to let you tell us what you're doing, what you're up to, and just give us an introduction about you.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Liz Rice. My job title is Chief Open Source Officer with Isovalent. And Isovalent is the company that originally created the Cilium project, which is now part of the CNCF. And it's based on eBPF, which is a technology that I'm super excited about. So, as Tracy mentioned, I've been involved in sort of security side of things for quite a while. We can use eBPF for some really interesting security related things. As we're recording, I'm kind of preparing for the Cloud Native Security Conference, which is next week, probably a week or two ago by the time you actually see the recording. But so things like supply chain I am absolutely confident is going to be a huge topic of conversation there, and I think eBPF will be as well. Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on the Cybersecurity Resilience Act?
Oh, yeah.
And how is it going to impact open source? Should we be worried?
Yeah. So actually, another role that I have, another hat that I wear, I'm on the board of an organization called Open UK, which is all about using open technology, open source, open hardware, open data more in society. And a big part of that is related to policy. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a technologist, but I get to hear, some of the opinions of people who are much more kind of knowledgeable in that area than I am. And I know Amanda Brock, who's the CEO of Open UK, was talking about how, at least in an early draft of that Act, there appeared to be some confusion about if you release open source software, you're releasing it into the wild and letting people use it, but you're not going to take liability for it. Nobody's going to take liability unless there's some kind of commercial arrangement. And I think that, at least in the earlier draft, from what I understood, it was kind of confusing that the liability that no open source project is going to be able to take responsibility for, or liability for something that's an open source piece of code. So yeah, I think that might still need to be ironed out. I'm not sure.
But it kind of drives down deeper into even commercial packages who are using open source packages, because now the commercial packages, they're going to basically be saying they're going to take liability for the open source packages that they're consuming.
Yeah, and I think
isn't that right? How it's written?
I don't think that's awful, in the sense that whoever is the commercial company who's going to take that liability on, and they're going to have to decide what risk that involves and whether they're being paid enough to take that risk. They get to choose whether they're using open source components or not. I think it will help to encourage good practice, because although no open source project in its right mind will take liability, that doesn't mean that they can't do good practices and that they can't have things like software bill of materials. So things like the CNCF is really encouraging projects to incorporate more of these like dependency management practices and SBOMs and all this good stuff that is coming up now, the tooling that we're starting to have around tracking your dependencies. Open source projects can do that, and that, I think that's a very good thing. And then commercial projects that depend on them can make decisions about, okay, does it have an OpenSSF scorecard? This is the scorecard project.
The scorecard, the OpenSSF scorecard.
Yeah. So I think things like that will help commercial projects understand the kind of risk they might be taking.
I kind of feel like we at the OpenSSF, we really have to get our ducks in a row, or our geese in a row, I guess you'd say. But it's going to take us a while to build out these practices, and I just hope that open source will still be consumed, because I think it's open source has taken us a very long way. And look, Kubernetes is open source, for goodness sakes. So how do we, it's going to be interesting over the next, I'd say, 3 years, and how we're navigating it and the impact that open source will have with these new acts. And, we still have other regions. China is certainly to follow. What they're going to say. So it just makes it scarier and scarier to use external unknown code. And that describes open source, especially packages, maybe not tools. Like we have an Artilius project that manages and consumes SBOMs. We have Kubernetes. Those may not be as, and Jenkins, other tools, Backstage. There's all kinds of great kind of DevOps tooling that you use to build out your software, but what you're delivering and the packages that's being included in it, I feel like we're going to see an impact in the future in terms of commercial code that is being, we're talking about COTS basically, that we're selling to other companies an entire package, especially if you're selling into the European market, that there's going to be a concern about putting open source in there. So maybe there's going to be a lot more work for coding, or tools like Copilot, where you take snippets, right?
Yeah.
I think it's going to change. Is it going to be a disruption? There just is.
The worst outcome, and I barely even want to say this idea out loud, but the worst outcome would be like, not necessarily just Copilot. I don't want to point the finger at any given implementation, but AI generated software that creates a commercial variant of something that's essentially copied from the open source project. And that would be awful, I think.
How will AI in general affect open source? I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'm just, all this stuff that's going on right now. It's AI does this, AI does that. It scares me.
The
Yeah,
really frightening thing is how, like, at a superficial level, it can be really quite accurate. You know, you can read these amazing
That's what's scary.
articles and you think, oh, wow, that's 90% right, but it's the 10% that's wrong that's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, that's got to be true in code as well, right? Automatic.
Well, we're going to see more code automation tools. I don't know what you want to call it. More code, like more solutions like Copilot. You know, we just started hearing about, what is it?
GPT.
GPT.
Yeah.
That's all I'm getting. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about a chat? That's all we're getting bombarded with on my end right now. And it's like, wow, scary. Not
my answer would be not necessarily. I think it's a very interesting application for AI. Will we be able to see through it soon enough? Yeah, we'll learn. Humans are good at pattern matching too. Professors will be able to go, oh yeah, that's definitely not written by this student. I know better. Right. So I think that we'll see through that. I certainly wish.
But won't it just evolve? Every time we think we're seeing through it, it's like there was a big thing this week about a university, was it Wharton, and somebody used it to write a paper, and the paper was great, but they said that the English used in it was so perfect, you could tell that it was fake. The information was great, but the grammar was so spot on. They're like, no human wrote this.
No human wrote it, right? Especially
so now they're going to
humans.
throw in dumb words, and they'll it's been a big topic of conversation in my household in general. So.
Well, I think in the coding world, we're going to see something similar. But what I believe, what I foresee happening are tools like, again, I'll just keep bringing up Copilot, where instead of having open source packages that we're consuming, they're going to have those modules that they've now have absorbed and they are pushing forward. And they're going to have the ownership of that now. So Copilot will have the licensing for that under some, I don't know how it licensed the code, but it's generating code just like chat, whatever it is, GPT or whatever it is doing. And I think that may solve some of the open source package issues, but at the same time, it will crush the open source market in terms of consumable packages.
Hey, Trace, let's stop for a sec because your mic went out.
It did?
Yeah. We can kind of hear you, but you sound like you're in the other room.
I think you moved and it might have fallen.
I admit, I got excited and I knocked it. So anyway,
just go back and start your thought over and we'll get it edited. No big deal.
Okay, so when we talk about things like code generation, what I believe will happen is that these packages that are commonly used that people consume as an open source will be included in the code generation. So they no longer will be coming from an open source library that you pull from some location, some repository. And that is how we're going to address things like the Cyber Resiliency Act, because then the company that's sending out the software will be the producers of it, even though they used something that's generating code.
I think there's going to be some really interesting intellectual property discussions and cases where, if AI didn't make everything up completely from scratch, it's learned by looking at other code. And, I've seen some, if I use eBPF as an example, I've seen some little paragraphs of text about eBPF that people have generated, at work, kind of for fun, like, let's see what it says about. And you can recognize some of the phrases. You can see that this is exactly what we say. We've said this phrase over and over and over again, and the AI has picked it up. And, maybe that's not quite our intellectual property, but there's going to be some point where, Copilot or an alternative, is it infringing other people's copyright by, regurgitating lines of code, algorithms, whatever level we want to think about that, sometimes if you look at other people's, a bit like you said, you can spot when somebody's copied an essay or if it wasn't their work. Are we going to start seeing AI generated code that's really just infringing other people's copyright?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
No,
the lawyers must be thrilled. Income stream for years.
Yeah.
We'll see. We will see. And I think
the bigger question is, let's take a poll to see when the first lawsuit happens.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is going to disrupt the software developer, though. We are starting to see a shift in everybody's not writing every single line of code. And that's why open source has been so popular. And as these kinds of tools become more and more accepted, I think that the role of the software developer will change. We'll get good at putting together the pieces like a Lego set. And at the same time, that might be good for women who are at home, working from home.
Well, yeah, the history of computing had women working from home back in the early days. So,
yeah, and not a lot of women go and take software classes. They don't take programming classes. I think it's less than 10% in most universities of women in taking software classes and learning to code. However, they may very well be able to pick up fairly quickly from a junior level, 2-year program coding, and be able to use these tools. And maybe the industry will shift and more women will become part of it because they want a job that they can do from home and raise their kids. It's kind of like when I was a kid, my neighbor, her mother worked from home, and I thought it was the coolest thing. But she typed like 130 words a minute. And she sat with the headphones on and she typed up all at one doctor's notes for the entire day. And somebody would deliver his notes and his recordings, and she would sit and type. And I thought it was awesome because mom was there all the time, right? And she could get up, do laundry, cook for us, do whatever she needed to do to be a mom, and she still had a job. And I always thought that was just amazing. So maybe that will happen for women.
So
I have a little story.
Did that when my kids were little.
Yeah,
I absolutely did that. But technology evolved the job I was doing away. It started out by driving to a truck and picking up documents to enter every day. And I stayed home with my 2 kids. Then the documents became a CD. We'd pick up a CD. And then it became an online enter situation where we'd pull it up and we'd enter from the document. And then it went away because the system could scan and recognize it all, and they didn't need us at all. That happened over about a 5-year period. But I did that from home so I could stay home with my kids till they were school age.
Exactly. And I think a lot of women want to do that.
When I was a kid, when I was kind of learning to type, I did learn to type on a typewriter, and my mum was a psychiatrist, and she actually had me typing up her notes, and which I really enjoyed because I was like typing and but it was, I don't know how many times I must have, and she specialized in old people as well, so I must have typed the word dementia thousands of times. And it turned out I was spelling it wrong. I spelt it T-U-R-E at the end of like thousands of people's notes. I don't know. I'd heard the word. I just assumed that was how it was spelled.
That's amazing.
So then, how did you
spell check on the typewriter?
No.
Yes. So how did you go from a teen spelling dementia wrong to software? Did you take computer science in college?
I actually took engineering in college, but I was already really into computers before I did that. We had a ZX80, like this tiny little 1K RAM machine that just did basic. And when we first got it, I was a bit disappointed because what I really wanted was like a video game. And this computer arrived and I thought, well, I'll make the most of it. And then I taught myself programming and that was it. And I always knew I was going to work with computers. So I didn't want to do computer science as a degree just because the engineering course looked more interesting and a bit broader. I was quite interested in things like electronics as well. And I wanted to be quite practical. But so there was an element of programming and logic and things in my degree, but it wasn't a computer science degree.
Yeah, I wanted to build cars.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And my mother said, what are you going to move to Detroit? And then and I'm from California. I was like, maybe that's not the best career for me. I was like, don't they build cars in California? And she's like, all the big companies are in Detroit. So I changed to business math, and most of that was computer stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
But engineering was what I was interested in.
So Detroit was where the last KubeCon was. Yeah. And I thought it was actually a really great place. I it was really welcoming. I was only there for like, a few days, and it was definitely, it had a variety of different neighborhoods, let's say.
It does.
But given how negative a lot of people had been beforehand, right. I was like, actually, no, this is nice. A lot of people have been incredibly welcoming. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. It's probably going through a revival. CSC used to be in Detroit. They were one of those big, tall buildings. So they had a technology sector that they were slowly kind of trying to bring around before the I guess it was probably late 1990s, early 2000s, where they really started going through a pretty heavy recession. So after
clearly had dark times, but it was. I thought as a visitor, it was a good place to visit.
Yeah, our team really enjoyed it as well. Tech.Strong had a group there doing video, and they really had a good time as well.
Good.
So Liz, tell us about KubeCon. Was there anything really cool that you learned, or anything that you want to share?
Oh, trying to remember what was big back then. That was in November.
Yeah, so long ago.
Last year.
It was like another year.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really fun for me was so Cilium project has been growing. We hit the button on a PR to apply for graduation, so that'll be a massive step. And we had our first ever kind of in-person community meeting, because pandemic, we hadn't been able to do it really before. And we honestly didn't know how many people would show up to this project meeting, because it was one of the pre-event days, so we didn't know how many people would be in town, and there's loads of these co-located events, and we put up a sign-up sheet, and there wasn't a huge amount of activity on the sign-up sheets. We thought, well, worst case, there's quite a few maintainers here, and we'll get on with some work or something. We'll be fine. And then people just kept arriving and showing up, and we had like a packed room. We had to keep going and getting more chairs, which was brilliant, seeing people wanting to get involved. And some of them came with like, I've got this particular issue I really want to, get into the nitty gritty of, or other people who are just like, I heard Cilium's interesting. Can you tell me what it is? So it was really great.
Why don't you do that for us? Because I'm not sure that we've really clarified the project that you're working on.
Yeah, sure.
And it's incubating at the CNCF.
It is, yeah.
Yes.
It's based on this technology called eBPF, which we can come to in a minute. And it is really observability, networking, and security for cloud native. Not necessarily even just Kubernetes, although the vast majority of people are using it in Kubernetes environments. But we do have some people using it for things like standalone load balancers, replacing some like physical boxes for load balancers. And yeah, the amazing power of it is really based on eBPF, which is this technology that allows you to run programs within the kernel. So you can hook into different events, which could be things like a network packet arriving, or different points in the network stack. And you can change the behavior of the kernel when these events occur. So you can do things like get a network packet and modify it and send it somewhere else. So we can use it in Cilium to do things like bypass some parts of the network stack that aren't necessary for cloud native networking, so it makes performance better. We can do things like network policy, so very efficiently in the kernel, checking whether or not a given network packet or connection is in or out of policy. And if it's not in policy, we just throw it away. It doesn't happen. So it's super powerful and really interesting because you get into the kind of nitty gritty of the kernel and you know, how is this networking stack really working and things like that. So yeah, I'm finding it really fascinating.
Well, when you talk about code that's that deep in the stack, open source code that deep in the stack, I have to go back to, I wonder how the Cyber Resiliency Act is going to impact that level of code. I hope that when you figure that out, the attorney that you guys might work with, or somebody could write a blog on it, because that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. You know, how is that going to be impacted? Because I'm sure that that's going to be in the list. I think one of the items on the list.
Everybody is running. So many people are, so many organizations are running on Linux. You know, Linux is open source. Now, maybe they're buying it all through, you know, distributions like Red Hat so that somebody is taking some liability. But yeah, it's you know, it's a big and complicated piece of code.
Exactly. And, you know, with kind of this global recession we're seeing, generally when we see a recession, the use of open source code spikes. When we are flush with cash, people are going out and buying commercial things. But as soon as they are cutting their budgets, they start relying on open source. So we have three kind of this intersection of three things that are impacting our industry right now. One is this potential of open source being consumed more because of the recession. Two, people are moving to Kubernetes and a microservices environment. And three, we have a problem with our open source security, all happening at the same time. It is a very impactful time, and it's a very interesting time to be in software, especially on open source projects.
I do think this, you know, the perception of security, you know, what's happened is a lot of these problems have come to light. It's not like there are new security, well, there are new security problems, but an awful lot of them have been around for a long time. They've just been discovered, just been realized. You know,
we have it's a security awakening.
Yes,
it really is.
Yes, it is. Exactly. So I wouldn't want people to sort of think, oh, you know, because people are using open source, things have become less secure. I think actually the opposite is true, because there is more kind of light being shone on those projects and there are more people's eyes on that code. It's just that we've got a lot more awareness now of when security, I mean, a decade ago, people lost your data. They didn't really even have to tell you about it. Whereas now it's, you know, it's a big deal. They really have to tell you when they've lost your data.
And, you know, and I think things like the CRA and the Biden administration's SBOM requirements, they're guidelines. They are, you know, they're guardrails. And we should have been looking at doing these things quite some time ago, but there wasn't, before the security awakening, before Log4j, let's just make it clear, nobody really cared to talk about it. Security was sort of like testing, you know, it's like, yeah, we'll get to it. You know, it's true. I think testers have always been forgotten heroes, and security people are the same way. But now we've gotten some light to the problem, and, you know, when you shine light on a problem, we generally get it solved. It's just going to take us a while.
So,
and, you know, you said
before we get, oh, go ahead, Trace.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, before we get too far along, because we're going to be winding up shortly, I want to hear some more about your new book.
Yeah. So I mentioned about eBPF and how I am fascinated by it. And I have been writing a book about it. It's called Learning eBPF. It is really a dive into kind of how you can get started with eBPF programming. It's really, I am a huge believer in seeing something concrete, you know, writing some code, making something happen in order to understand what, you know, what it's based on. I'm not someone who learns very well from looking at, you know, boxes and lines. I want to see code and I want to see what happens. So using kind of starting from a hello world, going through lots of different examples, I'm hoping to convey some of the power of what eBPF is. And if people do want to write their own program, I think not that many people will really need to write their own eBPF code, but if they want to explore it, they might find they really want to get involved, and great. And even if they just go, I'm just doing this so I can understand it, even better.
What's the name and when will it be released?
Yeah, so the title is Learning eBPF. It's coming out through O'Reilly. They're the publisher. There is already early kind of unedited release of a few chapters that you can download from isovalent.com. And then the full book has just gone into production. So literally, I've been looking at copy editors sort of changing the font on different terms and so on.
You're down to the really fun part.
Yeah, we're getting really close now. And the hope is that it will be out. It was originally scheduled to be in June, but we're well ahead of schedule. I think it'll be out probably in March, maybe April. And I'm really hoping we're going to get physical copies that we can give away at KubeCon in Amsterdam. That's my kind of dream.
And when is KubeCon and when is that?
It's the middle of April, I think.
KubeCon in Amsterdam?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. KubeCon in Amsterdam is it's the week before RSA, and that's why I know. So it's the week of the 10th, I believe. The 17th or the 21st. Because our team's going over there, and then they're flying straight from Amsterdam to San Francisco for RSA. So yeah, it's going to be a busy time. I'm only going to RSA, so yay. But yeah, that's going to be fun. I'm guessing you'll be there, Liz. So you got to look for Alan and Mike Vizard, and our team are going to be over there in Amsterdam doing live streaming, I believe. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, good. I think it'll be a really fun event. Amsterdam's a great city, and yeah, it's always good to see the community. I am a little bit conscious that travel budgets have been cut, so maybe it won't be quite as busy as previous years, but I still think it's the event in cloud native, really. So hoping to catch up with lots of people there.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I don't think I'll be there, but I wish everybody a good time.
Will you make it to the Chicago one then later in the year?
I don't know. KubeCon's really big. And for what we do, it's probably, we're just like a blip, So it's a little too big for what we're doing. And, we're part of the CD Foundation, the open source project. So I'm going to be at Women in Silicon Valley that week, but my partner will be at the CDCon, and a few of our committers will be at CDCon. So that's what we really focus on is CDCon. Generally, we would have gone to the function next week. I think it is next week.
It is,
yeah. But we're conscious of travel. We're a small startup. We can't go to everything.
Yeah.
Well, and like Liz said, with the economy, it's not going to be COVID that keeps people from traveling. It's going to be budgets.
And
so it'll be
pain in the butt of traveling. Traveling has not been fun, in at least in the U.S. in the last 6 months. It's been really it's been challenging. It'd be easier to drive.
Oh gosh. Well, I hope I'm not going to have to drive all the way from London to Seattle. That would be
we'll be back on boats, right?
That would be a long journey.
I am thinking of seriously considering cycling from London to Amsterdam though for KubeCon. So
interesting.
Yeah. There's a little bit of logistics to sort out.
How far is that?
Depends where you catch the ferry, because you do have to catch a ferry to get across the sea.
Really?
Yeah. But I am looking at a route that is probably only a total of about 150 miles on land, and then 150, 160, and then an overnight ferry. There's a considerably longer route with a considerably shorter or considerably longer riding, but considerably shorter ferry crossing.
So you'd have to decide whether you want to do the long ride or the short ride.
Yeah, it's more of a case of how long I'm going to take over it. And there's questions of things like how I'm going to get my luggage. Although one of my colleagues has volunteered to take a bag, so hopefully that'll be
that'd be really fun, though.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. And I've got a couple of conferences over the next couple of weeks, but when I'm through that, I know there's a group of people who are also interested in the idea of putting a ride together. So if anybody's watching this and wants to join a ride from London to Amsterdam,
there you go.
King Liz on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
LinkedIn's
King
good.
Liz.
Yeah,
and there's going to be a group of riders heading to Amsterdam. Well,
I've said
Liz,
it out loud now, so it's got to happen.
Oh yeah, now she has to do it.
Right.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for being with us today. It was really fun getting to meet you and chat with you, and I'm sure we'll bring you back to Tech.Strong for some other fun stuff that we do here. And sounds like you and Tracy will get to see each other in person maybe sometime soon at another event. But we really appreciate you being here with us today. And
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes, Liz, it was fabulous catching up with you.
Yeah, great to see you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and stay tuned for more fun stuff on Tech.Strong TV.